Good morning. It's Thursday already, and our psalm text in the daily lectionary for today is Psalm 23. I'll read it in the King James Version. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The psalm here has a forward and a backwards direction. It points back to David, who became the first of the great kings of Israel. We'll have to discount Saul in that regard. And David's first job was to be a shepherd. In fact, he was out doing his first job when Samuel came to visit, and all of the sons of Jesse were walked before Samuel. And Samuel kept saying, "This is not the one. This is not the one." And finally asks, "Is there any other?" And Jesse says, "Well, there's David who's out tending the flock, but we're pretty sure he wouldn't qualify." And Samuel says to bring him, and sure enough, that's the one that Samuel anoints as king to replace Saul and to begin the Davidic dynasty and also the Davidic covenant. For God makes a covenant with David. One of your descendants will always sit upon the throne of Israel. So that's the backwards look. The shepherd who was the best king that Israel knew before Christ is one who recognizes the Lord as his shepherd in the popular tradition. But there's also a pointing forward of Ezekiel. One can assume the Psalm's a little older than Ezekiel. And Ezekiel in chapter 37, I'm sorry, it might be chapter 34. I should have looked that up before I started the day. Talks about the worthless leadership, the worthless political leadership that Israel has. And God says they only feed themselves. They don't care for my sheep. They don't do what's proper. And I'm going to get rid of these worthless shepherds, and I myself will become the shepherd of the sheep. And that, of course, points forward to the one who in John chapter 10 is the good shepherd, Jesus himself. And Jesus' sayings in the other Gospels, where he looks out upon the people who are kind of hopeless and hapless and helpless, and says they are like sheep without a shepherd. But he recognizes that his calling by the Father is to be the shepherd of the lost sheep of Israel. So there's all of that in this psalm. In terms of our use of the psalm in our piety, it's a psalm of assurance. I always like to tell people this is a good psalm to know, to have memorized, for when your car breaks down in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, and you have no cell service, and you decide you have to get out and walk, and about a half hour into the walk, you start to hear the howling of wolves. That's a good time to know the words to "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." It is a great psalm for people who are experiencing illness or disability. And it is a psalm that reminds us that God's going to take care of us in the long term. The short term may be a reason for pessimism, but long term we are optimistic because God will take care of us. I do find that whenever I want to use it that way in a hospital, I sometimes, not whenever, but sometimes I get a pushback from people who think that this psalm is something that's used as funerals, and that's the only proper use of it. And they think maybe I'm rushing into their funeral when I'm reading it by their bedside when they're sick and in the hospital or recovering from surgery. Well, that of course is utter nonsense, but you can't take away the association that this psalm does have with funerals. And it's not a bad psalm to use at funerals, for we are certainly sheep without a shepherd when we have entered into death. except that the Good Shepherd knows our name, will speak our name, will call us out of death into life, and will give us life, light, and salvation as he shares his resurrection life with us in the age to come. And because of the Good Shepherd's promise to us, we recognize that to have the Lord as our shepherd is a wonderful gift and privilege that God gives to us, and it's something that we ought to remember early and often as we make our way through life. Have a great day. God bless.